The diplomatic outpost on the moon gleamed like a radiant jewel against the endless darkness of space, its rotating rings casting shifting shadows across the cratered surface. Inside the Grand Assembly Hall, a man stood at attention, his military stance contrasting sharply with the vibrant array of alien envoys surrounding him. "Let me get this straight," said an older officer, his face lined with worry. "You're volunteering for the connection ritual, the same one that's claimed 3 lives already?" "Yes, sir," replied the man, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "We need to bridge this gap. They're too powerful an ally to ignore." The officer's eyes narrowed. "And you think you're qualified because—" "With respect, sir, my record speaks for itself. 12 successful first contact missions, including the Centurion crisis. I understand alien psychology better than most." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "And I'm expendable, no family, no attachments." "Expendable isn't what we need. We need success." The officer gestured toward a holographic display showing a towering warrior. "They're twice your size, possess telepathic abilities we barely comprehend, and haven't shown any real interest in meaningful contact with humans." The man stepped closer to the hologram, studying the imposing figure. "That's exactly why we need to try harder, sir. The galaxy is changing. We need allies, not distant neighbors." Before the officer could respond, a commotion erupted near the main docking bay. The massive doors slid open, revealing a sight that froze everyone in the hull. A representative of the other species ducked to clear the 3-meter-high doorway. Her blue skin caught the artificial light, creating an ethereal glow. At 8 feet tall, she made the assembled diplomats look like children. Her ceremonial armor, adorned with symbols of her warrior caste, amplified her already commanding presence. The man felt his throat go dry. "HDs didn't do them justice," the officer whispered. "Last chance to reconsider," he said. "No, sir. I'm in." Her gaze swept the room, her solid purple eyes finally settling on him. Her expression shifted slightly. Was that disappointment? The formal introductions began, with representatives from various species stepping forward. When it was his turn, he approached without hesitation, maintaining eye contact despite having to crane his neck. "Welcome to the Lunar Diplomatic Station," he said in carefully practiced Valeran. "I am your connection candidate." Her head tilted slightly, her voice carrying a musical quality that translation devices couldn't quite capture. "You are smaller than expected." A ripple of nervous laughter went through the crowd, but he didn't flinch. "Good things come in small packages, as we say on Earth." "Humor," she noted, her tone neutral. "A curious defense mechanism." "Not defense," he countered, allowing a slight smile. "Communication. Sometimes the best way to bridge differences is to laugh at them." Her eyes narrowed, but something flickered in their depths. "You speak our language well, for a human." "I've had 3 months to prepare, though I'm sure my accent is terrible." "It is adequate." Was that amusement in her voice? "We shall see if your other preparations are equally so." The diplomatic reception continued, but he noticed her watching him throughout the evening. Her gaze wasn't hostile but analytical, like a scientist studying an unusual specimen. Later, during the formal dinner, he found himself seated across from her, a positioning that put them at somewhat equal eye level while she sat and he stood. The table had been specially designed to accommodate various species' anatomies and dietary needs. "Why did you volunteer for this mission?" she asked, delicately manipulating eating utensils that looked tiny in her hands. Honest answer or diplomatic one? Her expression sharpened with interest. "You acknowledge a difference?" "There's always one, isn't there? But I'll give you honesty. I volunteered because everyone else was too afraid to try." "And you?" "I am terrified," he admitted, taking a sip of his wine. "But fear is only useful if you let it sharpen your focus, not dull it." She set down her utensils, giving him her full attention. You are unexpected. Call me by my name if we're going to attempt the connection. We should probably be on a first-name basis. The connection is not assured, she reminded him. You must first prove worthy. How about we start with you calling me by my name, and we'll work our way up to worthy. A sound emerged from her throat, something between a laugh and a growl. You are either very brave or very foolish. Before they could continue, the station's alarm system shattered the diplomatic atmosphere. Red lights pulsed as the security alert blared in multiple languages. Security breach in Sector 7. Unknown hostiles have breached the hull. All diplomatic personnel proceed to secure areas immediately. He was moving before the announcement finished, his military training kicking in. Sector 7, that's near the station's power core. You know this station's layout? She was already standing, her massive frame tensed for action. I memorized it, part of those preparations you mentioned. He drew his sidearm, calculating routes and tactics. Want to help me save a few thousand lives? Her purple eyes gleamed. Lead the way, small warrior. They moved through the station corridors, an unlikely pair, the 9-foot warrior and the human soldier. Emergency bulkheads were sealing throughout the station, but he knew the maintenance passages that would get them to Sector 7 faster. Through here, he indicated a service tunnel. It'll be tight for you, but it's quicker than the main corridors. She eyed the tunnel dubiously. You expect me to crawl? I expect you to help me stop terrorists from potentially blowing up this station. Your choice how you do it. To his surprise, she laughed, a real laugh this time. Very well. Show me your way. They encountered the first group of attackers at the tunnel's exit, 3 figures in environmental suits carrying plasma cutters. He signaled for her to hold position while he assessed the situation. I count 3. They're trying to breach the power core's outer layer. We need to. Before he could finish, she burst from the tunnel, her massive form charging the attackers with shocking speed. He cursed and provided covering fire, forcing one of the attackers away from their equipment. The fight was brief but intense. Her raw strength sent one attacker flying into a wall with enough force to crack their suit's faceplate. His precise shots disabled another's weapon, while his hand-to-hand combat training proved surprisingly effective against the third. Behind you. Her warning came with a telepathic pulse so strong it made his ears ring. He dropped and rolled instinctively as she threw a piece of debris over his head, catching a 4th attacker they hadn't spotted. When the dust settled, all 4 attackers were subdued, and station security was on its way. They stood among the unconscious bodies, both breathing heavily. Your combat skills are acceptable, she said, something like respect creeping into her voice. High praise, he grinned, wiping blood from a split lip. You're not so bad yourself, though we might need to work on the whole subtle approach thing. Subtlety is overrated, she stepped closer, towering over him. You knew I would choose direct action, yet you planned your strategy around it. Why? Because that's what connection is about, isn't it? Working with our differences, not against them. She studied him for a long moment, then reached down and touched his injured lip with one massive finger, surprisingly gentle. Perhaps, she said softly, you are not entirely inadequate after all. The moment was interrupted by the arrival of security teams, but something had shifted between them. As they gave their reports and the station slowly returned to normal operations, he caught her watching him with new interest. Later, as the diplomatic reception resumed with heightened security, she approached him again. I have decided to proceed with the connection preparation trials. He raised an eyebrow. What changed your mind? You have shown courage, intelligence, and adaptation. These are desirable qualities. Her purple eyes held his. Though you are still frustratingly small. I prefer to think of it as efficiently sized, he countered, earning another of those growling laughs. We begin tomorrow, she declared. Do not be late, efficiently sized warrior. As she walked away, he couldn't help but smile. It was a start, and in diplomacy, sometimes that was all you needed. The next morning brought the artificial glow of simulated sunlight streaming through the reinforced windows of the training facility. He arrived early, finding her already there, her massive form moving through a series of fluid combat stances that seemed to defy her size. "You're early," she noted without breaking her routine. "Couldn't sleep," he admitted, removing his jacket. "Thought I might as well get started." She completed her sequence before turning to face him. "The connection ritual requires more than physical preparation, small warrior. I know. Mental synchronization, emotional resonance, and..." He paused, searching for the right Valerian term. "Spiritual alignment. You've studied our texts well." She approached, her movement deliberately slow. But before he could react, her mind brushed against his, a sensation like static electricity across his consciousness. He staggered, unprepared for the intensity. "Your mental barriers are strong," she observed, "but rigid. They must be flexible, like water." "That would be easier if you'd warned me before doing that," he gasped, steadying himself. A slight smile curved her lips. "Enemies do not warn before they strike. Neither will I." Thus began their training routine. Each morning started with physical conditioning, a brutal combination of human military exercises and Valerian warrior disciplines. Despite their size difference, he held his own, his agility complementing her raw strength. "Your movements are efficient," she commented one morning, watching him complete a complex maneuver. "Like a killing stroke disguised as a caress." Was that a compliment or criticism? An observation. Her purple eyes lingered on him. "You hide much beneath your surface." The afternoon sessions focused on mental exercises, which proved far more challenging. His military training had taught him to fortify his mind, now he had to learn to open it. "Relax," she instructed, her massive hands hovering near his temples. "Your thoughts are like clenched fists. Open them." "Easier said than done," he muttered, trying to ignore how her proximity affected him. "In my line of work, mental barriers keep you alive. And in this work, they will kill you." Her voice softened. Trust must begin somewhere. Slowly, day by day, they made progress. He learned to recognize the unique signature of her mental presence, like distant thunder on a summer night. She, in turn, began to understand human concepts of personal space, though she found them amusing. "Your species is so concerned with invisible boundaries," she remarked during a break. "Yet you willingly enter each other's minds through what you call small talk. Speaking of which," he grinned, "why did the human cross the galaxy?" Her expression showed familiar exasperation. "Another of your jokes. To get to the other side of the universe. That is not funny." "The delivery needs work," he admitted, "but you're smiling." "I am not." "You are just, a little." Their banter was interrupted by the arrival of a human ambassador, his face tight with concern. "Captain, a moment of your time." He exchanged glances with her before following the ambassador to a corner of the training room. "There's opposition growing to this project, both human and Vora. Some believe the connection ritual will give them too much influence over human affairs, or humans too much influence over theirs. And hence the recent security breach," he concluded. "Just watch your back, Captain." As the ambassador left, he noticed her focused expression. "You heard all that, didn't you?" "My hearing is superior to humans," she confirmed. "As is my ability to sense deception." The ambassador speaks truth, but not all of it. That evening, during their cool-down exercises, he felt a shift in their mental connection. Instead of the usual controlled exchange, he caught glimpses of her memories, her training as a warrior, the weight of her people's expectations, and something else, concern for him. The connection broke abruptly. She stepped back, her expression guarded. "That was unexpected." "You saw some," he said carefully. Did you see anything from me? She nodded slowly. Your courage. Your loneliness. Your. She hesitated. Attraction. The word hung between them like a challenge. He met her gaze steadily. Does that bother you? It should. She moved closer, her massive form casting him in shadow. You are small, fragile, alien. But you are also. Her hand reached out, fingers stopping just short of touching his face. Fascinating. The moment was shattered by alarms, not the station's security system this time, but proximity warnings from the training room itself. Multiple armed figures emerged from concealed panels in the walls. They moved in perfect sync, their recent training paying off. She provided cover while he disabled the nearest attacker, then used her strength to launch him toward another. Their minds touched briefly during the fight, allowing them to coordinate without words. When station security arrived, they found 6 unconscious assassins and the 2 of them standing back to back, both breathing heavily. Well, he panted, that's one way to test our connection. Her laugh rumbled through her chest. Would you prefer I panic? Her hand found his shoulder, engulfing it. No. I prefer you exactly as you are. The aftermath brought increased security and scrutiny. Investigations revealed the assassins were hired by a coalition of conservative factions from both species. The Connection Ritual project was now under threat of cancellation. In their private training room, they faced each other across the mat. They fear what we might become, she said softly. What might we become, he asked. She reached out, this time allowing her fingers to brush his cheek. The touch sparked through their growing mental link. Something new. Something neither of our peoples has seen before. Is that what you want? He asked, leaning slightly into her touch. What I want, she drew him closer until he had to tilt his head back to maintain eye contact, may not align with my duties. In my experience, he smiled, the best things rarely do. Their training continued with new intensity. The physical danger had sparked something deeper in their connection. During combat simulations, their minds merged more freely, sharing not just thoughts but emotions, sensations, desires. Your mind tastes like starlight, she commented during one such merger. I didn't know minds had tastes, he managed, still adjusting to the intensity of their connection. Much about us remains unknown to each other. Her mental presence caressed his consciousness. Perhaps that is part of the attraction. The breakthrough came during a particularly challenging simulation. Surrounded by holographic enemies, they moved as one being, her strength and his agility perfectly balanced. Their minds merged completely for a brief moment, and in that instant, they understood each other fully. He saw her childhood on her home world. Felt the pressure of being chosen as her people's representative, experienced her growing fascination with him. She, in turn, witnessed his lonely path through military service, his desire to bridge the gap between their species, and the depth of his feelings for her. When they emerged from the connection, both were shaken. That was. He started. Yes, she agreed, her voice unusually soft. They stood in silence, processing the intimacy of what they'd shared. Finally, she spoke. The ritual will be more intense than this. Some say it changes those who undergo it permanently. Are you warning me or yourself? He asked. She touched his face again, her massive hand gentle against his skin. Perhaps both. What we begin here cannot be undone. Good, he said firmly. Because I don't want to undo it. Their eyes met, purple to brown, alien to human, and something electric passed between them. The connection ritual loomed ahead, but in that moment, both knew they'd already crossed a point of no return. Tomorrow, she declared, we begin the final preparations. He nodded, feeling the weight of their shared future. Tomorrow. Her growling laugh filled the room. Should I bring flowers? You are impossible, small warrior. Yet here you are. Yes, she agreed, her voice rich with emotion. Here we are. As they parted for the night, both knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The political opposition, the physical dangers, the cultural barriers, all seemed insignificant compared to the connection they'd forged. The fate of human-Vora relations might hang in the balance, but for them, something far more personal was at stake. They had found something neither species had thought possible. A bridge across the vast gulf between their kinds, built not just of diplomatic necessity but of genuine understanding and growing love. That night, he couldn't shake the sense that everything had changed. The way her voice had softened, her laughter rich with emotion, left an imprint on his thoughts. Yes, we're here, she had said, and the weight of those words settled over him like a blanket as the quiet hum of the lunar diplomatic station surrounded him. Standing at the window of his quarters, he stared out at the pale glow of Earth on the horizon. Sleep eluded him, not with everything hanging so precariously in the balance. The fate of human-Vora relations was precarious, but it wasn't just the political alliances that troubled him now. What stirred deep in his chest was far more personal. Her presence filled his mind even when she wasn't there, her towering form, her sharp wit, the way her touch sent a shock through his skin, gentle yet powerful. He closed his eyes, exhaling. What they were about to face, what they had to do, would be nothing short of a battle for survival. Both the external threat and the emotional stakes between them loomed large. If anything, tonight had shown him that their bond had become far more than a diplomatic experiment. It had grown into something real, something that neither of them could walk away from, not without leaving pieces of themselves behind. His thoughts were interrupted by a sharp knock at the door. Her deep, rumbling voice was unmistakable, even through the barrier. "Grayson. Come in," he called, turning toward the entrance. She stepped into the room, her presence immediately commanding attention even though she ducked slightly to fit through the human-sized doorway. Her purple eyes were darker than usual, intense with the weight of what she had come to say. "They've made their move," she said, her voice low but steady. "The attack is happening tonight. We need to go now." His heart leapt in his chest, not from fear but from the urgency in her words. He moved toward her, grabbing his jacket and sidearm, knowing instinctively that this was the moment they had been waiting for, the moment everything would unravel. As soon as he reached her side, she placed her hand on his shoulder, fingers curling gently but firmly. Her grip was always so controlled, a testament to her power. "We won't make it far if we stay here," she said. "We're being hunted." "I figured," he muttered, feeling the adrenaline spike through his veins. "Do we have a plan?" "We run," she replied simply. "But it's not only after us. High-ranking members of both factions, human and Vora, see us as a threat. They won't stop until the connection ritual is destroyed. Until we're destroyed." His mind worked quickly. "Then we have to complete it before they can reach us." Her eyes flickered with something softer. "We complete it," she agreed, and for the first time, there was a tenderness in her voice that hadn't been there before. They moved swiftly through the dimly lit corridors of the station, their steps almost silent despite the tension crackling in the air. Every shadow, every corner could conceal an enemy. His mind was on high alert, scanning every movement, every flicker of light. Beside him, she was a force of calm, moving with the grace and precision of a warrior, her massive frame silent and lethal as they made their way deeper into the station. It wasn't long before the alarms began to blare. The red emergency lights cast long, eerie shadows over the walls, heightening the tension between them. "We're running out of time," he muttered, glancing up at her. She nodded, her expression hardening. "The maintenance tunnels, too obvious." "I agree," he replied, his mind racing through alternatives. "What about the cargo holds?" "Zero gravity, it'll be harder for them to track us." Her lips twitched in what almost looked like a smirk. "Most humanoids hate zero-G. Most Vora too." "Perhaps," she admitted, but there was a flicker of amusement in her eyes. "But I trust you." He blinked. She wasn't one to throw those words around lightly. "Then let's move." They sprinted down the corridor, hearing the echo of footsteps growing closer behind them. A distant plasma shot sizzled past his shoulder, and he cursed under his breath. "Allow me," she growled, pausing only briefly to rip a section of wall paneling free with one hand. She hurled it down the corridor, her strength sending the makeshift projectile smashing into their pursuers. The delay bought them precious seconds, and they darted around the corner toward the cargo hold access. "Hope you like floating," he muttered as he keyed in the access code. The doors slid open, revealing the expanse of the zero-gravity cargo chamber beyond. "I do not," she responded, but there was no hesitation in her steps as they launched themselves into the weightless void. The sensation of floating through space was familiar to him, but for her, the experience was far more disorienting. Her massive frame, usually so graceful and poised, flailed slightly in the absence of gravity. He maneuvered toward her, steadying her with gentle touches. "Work with the emptiness," he murmured, his hands guiding her. "Don't fight it." She looked down at him, her purple eyes dark and intense. "I don't like feeling out of control." "Then trust me," he said softly, locking his gaze with hers. "I won't let you fall." Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment, something passed between them, something deeper than words. The connection they had been building for so long was starting to solidify, even without the ritual. Their pursuers hesitated at the entrance to the cargo hold, exactly as he had predicted. The zero-gravity environment threw off most humanoids, buying them the time they needed to glide deeper into the forest of floating containers. "Your species adapts remarkably well to adversity," she said as they moved. "We've had plenty of practice," he replied with a faint smile. He sobered quickly, though, his eyes scanning the area. "The real question is, who's trying to kill us?" "Not just mercenaries," she said, her voice filled with anger. "Some of them were Vora warriors from my own caste. They've joined forces with the humans who fear the connection." His jaw clenched. "They're that afraid of what we might accomplish together." Before she could answer, a new group of attackers appeared at the opposite end of the cargo hold, using magnetic boots to keep their balance. He cursed under his breath, tugging her behind a floating container. "We need to reach the emergency airlocks," he said, his voice tight. "If we can get to the outer hull, we might be able to slip away." A sudden explosion rocked the station, sending containers tumbling through the airless void. Her arm shot out, pulling him into her chest as a massive piece of debris hurtled past them. "You saved me again," he gasped, his heart pounding against his ribs. "We protect what is precious to us," she replied, her voice filled with quiet intensity. His breath hitched. The way she said it, the way her eyes locked onto his, it wasn't just a declaration of loyalty. It was something far deeper, far more personal. But there wasn't time to dwell on it now. They made their way through the chaos, using the debris for cover. Their pursuers were relentless, growing bolder as they navigated the treacherous zero-gravity environment. Another explosion sent a fresh wave of debris flying, and the station's emergency lights began to flash. "Life support is failing in sectors 12 to 15, the station's AI announced calmly. "Emergency protocols engaged." "They're trying to force us into a corner," he realized, his mind racing. "They're cutting off sections of the station to trap us." Her jaw tightened. "Then we'll find another way out." They propelled themselves toward the nearest emergency airlock, but as they neared the hatch, another explosion shook the station, sending the massive door slamming shut. He cursed under his breath, grabbing onto a nearby support beam to steady himself. "We're running out of options," he muttered. She glanced around, her purple eyes narrowing as she took in their surroundings. "There's only one choice left." He turned to her, his brows furrowing. "What do you mean?" She reached out, cupping his face in her massive hand, her touch impossibly gentle. "The connection ritual. We complete it now. His heart skipped a beat. Here. Now. There is no other choice, she said, her voice low and firm. We cannot wait any longer. The ritual is our only chance. He swallowed hard, his mind racing. The connection ritual wasn't just a diplomatic formality, it was something far more profound, something that would bind them together in ways neither of them could fully comprehend. And once it was done, there would be no going back. He looked up at her, searching her eyes for any sign of doubt, but there was none. She was resolute, her gaze unwavering as she looked down at him. I'm ready, he said softly, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotion swirling inside him. Her lips curved into a faint smile, her eyes softening. Then let's begin. They found a small maintenance chamber, sealing the door behind them to buy themselves some time. The air was thin, and the emergency lighting cast everything in a red glow, making the space feel even more claustrophobic. But none of that mattered now. They sat cross-legged on the floor, facing each other in the dim light. Her silver-scaled skin seemed to glow in the darkness, her purple eyes luminous as she reached for him. Your mind to my mind, she began, her voice a low, steady hum. Your heart to my heart. Their fingers intertwined, and despite the vast difference in their sizes, the connection felt right. He could feel the warmth of her skin, the pulse of her energy thrumming beneath the surface. Your strength to my strength, he continued, his voice barely more than a whisper. Your soul to my soul. The connection between them deepened, and he felt a sudden rush of emotions, fear, desire, longing, but they weren't just his emotions. They were hers as well, bleeding into his consciousness like watercolors blending together. He saw flashes of her memories, her childhood on the Vora home world, the weight of tradition and expectation pressing down on her shoulders. He saw the moment she first laid eyes on him, her initial dismissal of him as weak and insignificant, followed by her growing fascination with his quiet strength. In return, she saw him, his loneliness, his desire to bridge the gap between their species, his growing attraction to her despite the vast differences between them. Their minds twined together, their thoughts and feelings becoming one as they continued the ritual. The air in the chamber was growing thinner, but neither of them noticed. They were too lost in each other, too consumed by the depth of their connection. He whispered her name, his voice a mix of awe and wonder. I never thought, she began, her voice equally soft, equally filled with wonder. Their connection reached its peak, and in that moment, something shifted. He could feel the energy coursing through him, changing him at a fundamental level. He gasped, his body trembling as the transformation took hold. Her eyes widened as she felt it too, her massive frame shuddered as the energy flowed through her, reshaping her, altering her in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. But even as their bodies changed, their connection remained strong, stronger than ever before. They were no longer two separate beings, they were one. The door to the chamber began to give way, the sound of cutting tools echoing through the small space. But neither of them cared. They had transcended the physical world, their minds and souls entwined in a way that could never be undone. The door to the chamber crashed open, but the attackers stopped in their tracks. They had expected to find two vulnerable beings caught in a desperate act. What they saw instead were two figures transformed beyond recognition, standing side by side, their bodies shimmering with the energy of their completed connection. Their eyes, both now glowing with the same luminous purple hue, were fixed on their enemies, unafraid, unshaken. Her voice was the first to break the silence, carrying both power and joy. The connection is complete. His voice, steady and resonant, echoed her words. And what is joined cannot be broken. The soldiers hesitated, their weapons raised but their courage faltering. It was clear that the two beings standing before them were no longer just a human soldier and a Vora warrior. They had become something else entirely, something that transcended the physical and mental boundaries of their separate species. There was a new kind of power in their union, one that no weapon could break. The attackers began to retreat, confusion and fear spreading among their ranks. They did not pursue them. Instead, they simply stood there, united, knowing that their bond had already won the battle. As the last of the soldiers disappeared down the corridor, he turned to her. He could still feel the electric hum of their connection, a sensation so profound that it blurred the line between where his thoughts ended and hers began. He had never felt so complete, so whole. Her massive hand reached out, gently touching his face. Her touch was no longer just an expression of care, it was a part of their very existence, an extension of the bond they now shared. "We are one," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. "I can feel everything, your thoughts, your emotions. You are within me, and I am within you." He replied, his voice filled with the same wonder. "I can feel your strength pulsing through me, your memories and desires interwoven with my own. For the first time, I truly understand the depth of your experiences, the weight of the expectations placed upon you as a Vora warrior, the loneliness of standing apart from your people. I see the world through your eyes, and I know what it means to be you." Their bodies still buzzed with the energy of the ritual, the transformation not just spiritual but physical. He could feel his senses heightened, his muscles more responsive, his mind sharper than ever before. She, too, seemed to move with a new grace, her once imposing form now carrying a lightness that hadn't been there before. They had not merely connected, they had become a fusion of two beings, each enhancing the other in ways they could not have imagined. But it wasn't just about power. It was about trust, about love. She stepped closer, her towering form bending down so that her face was level with his. "You truly are special," she whispered, her breath brushing against his skin. Her voice wasn't just in his ears, it echoed through his mind, a direct line into his soul. "I have searched for this all my life. Someone who would see me not just as a warrior, but as more. You were the one I was waiting for." His heart pounded in his chest, but it wasn't fear that fueled it. It was desire, a desire that had been growing between them for so long, held back by duty and circumstance. Now, in this moment, there was nothing left to hold them apart. "You're strong," he said, his voice low and intimate. His hands moved to her face, feeling the warmth of her skin beneath his fingers, the pulse of life that matched his own. "But your strength doesn't scare me. It's what draws me to you." Her eyes softened, her massive hands enveloping his as she brought him closer. "You've changed me, little warrior," she murmured, her lips curving into a small, almost shy smile. "I didn't think I could feel this way about anyone." He smiled, his heart swelling with affection. "I'm not so little anymore, am I?" "No," she agreed, her voice filled with warmth. "You are more than I ever expected." Their foreheads touched, and for a moment, the rest of the world faded away. The alarms, the chaos outside the chamber, the political tension, it all became irrelevant. All that mattered was this moment, this connection that bound them together so completely that they were no longer separate beings. The energy between them intensified, a heat rising from the core of their bond. It wasn't just the ritual that had brought them here. It was the growing affection, the desire that had simmered beneath the surface for so long. The connection had stripped them of all barriers, leaving nothing but raw emotion. And they both felt it. Her lips hovered near his, her breath warm against his skin. "Ethan," she whispered, her voice laced with vulnerability, something she rarely showed. He closed the distance between them, their lips meeting in a kiss that was both tender and powerful. It was a kiss that spoke of everything they had been through together, every battle, every moment of doubt, every unspoken word. Their bodies moved in sync, guided not just by desire but by the deeper connection they now shared. Her arms wrapped around him, pulling him against her, and he could feel the rhythm of her heart beating in time with his. Their kiss deepened, and the bond between them pulsed with life, their thoughts and emotions merging even further. It wasn't just a physical act, it was the final step in their union, the ultimate expression of trust and love. "You are part of me now," she whispered into his mind, her mental voice soft yet firm. "And I am part of you," he replied, his hands sliding to the back of her neck, his fingers tangling in her hair. I wouldn't have it any other way. Their movements became more fluid, their bodies reacting to the shared sensations that flowed between them. Every touch, every breath was amplified by the connection, making every moment feel like an eternity. Her hands, once so rigid and controlled, were now gentle as they explored the contours of his body. Her touch was both reverent and passionate. He could feel her emotions surging through their bond, her need, her desire, but also her love, a love so deep that it threatened to overwhelm him. He responded in kind, letting her feel his own emotions, the depth of his affection for her, the admiration and awe that had grown since the moment they met. Their minds danced together, their thoughts intertwined in a way that made words unnecessary. They understood each other on a level that went beyond language, beyond physical touch. It was a union of souls, something far more profound than anything either of them had ever experienced. As the moments passed, the intensity of their bond only grew. Their bodies, now in perfect harmony, moved together as one, their movements reflecting not just the ritual but the true intimacy that had been building between them. She, who had once been cold and distant, was now warm and open, her body softening under his touch. And he, who had always been so controlled, so disciplined, found himself surrendering to the moment, letting go of everything except the sensation of being with her. "You've changed me," she said again, but this time her voice was filled with wonder, as if she was still coming to terms with the transformation. "We've changed each other," he replied, his voice hushed but steady. His hand slid down to meet hers, their fingers intertwining once again. "This is more than just a ritual. This is us." Their connection reached a crescendo, the energy between them crackling like electricity. It was as if the entire universe had aligned, bringing them to this moment where nothing else mattered but the two of them, joined in a bond that could never be broken. When the final wave of the connection washed over them, it was as if time itself had stopped. He could feel his mind expanding, his consciousness merging with hers in a way that defied explanation. He could sense her memories, her thoughts, her deepest desires. And she could feel his, the loneliness he had carried with him for so long, the longing to be more than just a soldier, to be seen, to be loved. And now, they had found each other. As their bodies stilled and their breathing slowed, he looked into her eyes, his heart swelling with love. "We're different now," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. She nodded, her hand coming up to cup his face. "Yes, we are, more than we were before." Her fingers traced the lines of his jaw, her touch both intimate and tender. "Now we are truly one." The glow in their eyes began to fade, but the bond remained stronger than ever. They had completed the ritual, but the transformation was far from over. They were no longer just a human and a Vora, they were something more, something new, a union of two souls that would never be undone. "Come," she said softly, her voice laced with affection. "It is time to return." As they stood, their bodies still buzzing with the energy of the connection, they knew that the world outside the chamber would be waiting for them. But they were no longer the same people who had entered this room. They were stronger now, united. In the days that followed, they became living proof of what was possible between their species. Their permanent bond, visible in their altered appearances and shared consciousness, sparked a revolution in human-Vora relations. "Do you regret it?" he asked one evening as they stood watching Earthrise over the lunar horizon, their minds contentedly intertwined. "Regret becoming one with my impossible small warrior." Her mental touch was full of warmth and humor. "Never. I'm not so small anymore," he reminded her, though he still had to look up to meet her eyes. "You were never small where it mattered," she replied.